So speaking of mutations, on these wild pigeons, how often do you get mutations on them? Or is anybody breeding mutations? Or is there just too few of them?
Actually, there's only one mutation that I can say is a genuine mutation in the green-winged dove in the U.S., and that's a blue mutation. It's from a distance it looks black, but in the sunlight it's iridescent blue. We really don't have any mutation doves in the U.S. like they do in Europe and Southeast Asia.
Oh, Europe is...
That's the place. I mean, like in South Africa, they have mutation ringnecks, Senegals, just like we have mutation ringnecks. All these incredible colors, but none of that exists in the U.S. I have tangerine Senegals, but I will admit, they were made about 30 years ago by a guy in Texas by crossing tangerine ringnecks into Senegals, and then because the tangerine color is dominant, the first generation you're going to get a tangerine hybrid. Well, you bring that back to the Senegal, and you keep doing that, and you're fixing it in there. And they look just like Senegals, and they're tangerine colors. They're gorgeous, but it's not the same as a bird that originated in the wild.
So speaking of hybrids, is there a lot of hybrids in the parrot or in the pheasant industry? Well, parrot now too. Pheasant industry, we got a lot of species that are hybridized. There's quite a few in the waterfowl, especially subspecies. What about
essentially nothing like that exists in our exotic dove populations in the U.S.
So just going to interrupt you. I don't know how many subspecies like these.
Actually,
is there a lot of subspecies in these?
If there were, that was maybe at the beginning of all of this in the 30s and 40s. Right now, you couldn't recognize a subspecies of the green-winged dove in the U.S. They're all the same.
Is there subspecies of green-winged doves?
Yes, there are. Like Australia has their own unique.
In Indonesia or whatever,
right, they all have different.
Solomon Islands.
And some of those have made it into Europe. So that the European breeders are maintaining certain peculiar races of green-winged doves. I will admit, none of them are as attractive as the one that we have from India. Right. That's the most colorful one. But they are interesting, and I can see the point of maintaining that if that was your interest. That would never work in the U.S. We don't have. I hate to say it. I'm sorry if I piss too many people off, but we don't have the quality of the large quality of breeders that they do in Europe that are dedicated to maintaining things like that.
Well, that's kind of a double-edged sword because you got a lot of breeders over there.
Oh yeah, you do.
But you got a lot of hybridization over in Europe, and you've got a lot of, and I'm probably going to piss people off too. Yeah, you got a lot of hybridization over there. You have a lot of mutations over there.
That's true.
And mutations, like hybrid, if you don't monitor the populations and practice responsible aviculture, you stand to lose your. And people.
No question about that.
People fail to understand that mutations are perhaps more of a danger to a lot of these species than even hybridization.
Well, there's certainly a group of people in the U.S. that would never want a mutation of anything, and I can understand that. They want the real thing. And then there's another group that just thrive on mutations, right. And that's what they're seeking.
So me, I'm anti-mutation if it's not done in a responsible manner. Mm-hmm. If you want to keep mutations, white mandarin ducks or whatever, keep them, separated so they're not going to be mixing back on the. And people say, oh well, it's a mandarin. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter because you got a whole cage full of budgies down here,
right?
And if you take the two green ones out of there, you're not going to get green budgies. You're not going to breed true to it. And this is, Muscovies. Are you familiar with wild Muscovies?
Oh yes.
We have an issue for the past. Well, since they were actually first brought into captivity, we have a strain of them that produces great chocolate-colored chicks.
Absolutely.
We can't get rid of it.
I know.
I've actually had some wild colors pop up, over the past couple of years.
Sure.
But the thing is, when they grow out, they're growing, a lot of white feathers. And, it's like kind of like a barred rock chicken or barring. What's that making noise?
That's a gray peacock.
Oh, I didn't see these peacock pheasants.
He's finally getting excited
So
about
they should
spring.
be laying now.
Oh,
any day.
she has been laying, but so far the eggs aren't fertile. This is their first season together. Older hen, younger male. This is his first mature season. But you know, speaking of the mutations, I was once visited by a guy from Holland back at the beginning of the internet days when I had zebrafinch.com, you know, and so this guy from Holland came to visit me, a young fellow who was into finches, and he commented his next stop was going to be in California to visit another zebrafinch breeder. He says, I have to travel all across the U.S. to find the next zebrafinch breeder. In Holland, I have to go 5 minutes down the road, and they're all over the place.
But you know, that's the thing is there's so many breeders over there.
Yes.
But they want to make money, and you can't make money on wild types anymore. So you got to resort to other means.
Oh, mutations is their thing today.
Because you can't make any money on the regular stuff.
Right.
But you know, and that's another thing is, you know, getting to hybrids again. I'm against hybrids, but then I got to stop and I got to think back when I was a teenager. My first pair of ducks was a Muscovy Indian Runner hybrid.
Oh my God.
So, you know, but nobody's going to tell me back when I was a teenager you should be called that or whatever,
right.
Because in the long run that's what stimulated my interest. So I guess my point is there's a place for some of this in the industry, and it's taken me 40 plus years to realize that, you know, we need to support some of the people that are raising, you know, some of the mutations and the hybrids and stuff like that as well.
I don't know if you experienced what I experienced back in the. I started out really in the 70s, earnestly pursuing mostly finches. That was my goal. From exotics to zebras, and so I was probably about 21, 22 at the time, savvy enough to be perceptive of how people were treating me when I would go to visit them. And it was incredibly common to find older men breeders who were reluctant to tell you anything about their success.
Still today.
I mean, I couldn't believe how much they would hide from you, and you know, and avoid direct questions. And I promised myself I would never be that way.
So the problem we have now is we do have a lot of breeders that have still carried that same mentality, but now, you know, we're looking at restrictions on importing and exporting now. You know, it's truncated, and there's nothing compared to what there was back in the 80s and 90s and 70s. If you don't continue to get people to learn, you know, teach them how to raise birds, we're not going to have it. You know, we may not have any attention.
Well,
how many species of pigeons do you figure we've lost since our importing days? I mean, what is there? 300 and something species of pigeons in the world?
Well, there's it's approaching 400, if not a little more than that. Maybe we've had a small percentage of that in the U.S., but nowadays we haven't even a fraction of that percentage remaining.
So I think that Tony Silva,
Cookbill breeder,
a couple years ago at a conference, I think he mentioned something like, you know, within 20 years ago we had over 200 species of parrots, and there's like 300 or 400 species of parrots in the world, not including the subspecies, but I think there was over 200 species, he said, and now there's something like 40 species of parrots left. I mean, I'm sure there's a little bit more because there's, you know, some broken off, but we've experienced the same thing with these game birds and pigeons and stuff like that, unfortunately.
Well, oh yes, without a doubt. In fact, you know,
I remember you were talking about some Mexican pigeon from some island or something that you had at one point, and that disappeared.
I mean, I feel so fortunate that I grew up in a period when those birds were still available in the U.S. So as a kid, I thought nothing of it. I can buy them, you know. And
I was there too. I remember that.
If I get rid of them, I'll just buy some more when I want them. Well,
it doesn't work like that.
No, in fact, I will never think of anything that way again.
So then you feel like you're responsible for something.
Well, you know, I mean, I had Caribbean doves and bred them. I had Australian plume doves and bred them, and none of those are available anywhere. You can't even get them in Europe anymore.
Yep.
So I mean, they're all gone. And who could have foreseen that?
But then the other thing is, I mean, that's kind of a two-part thing. We're getting stuff in and imports. We didn't think that was ever going to end.
No.
But there's very few people that said, hey, we should start breeding this stuff.
Well,
and then the third part is economics plays a part.
Oh, there's no question about it. You know, this story I'm going to tell you is sort of a catch-22 story because it doesn't have a good ending, but it didn't have a good existence to begin with. But the Australian plume dove, which is a gorgeous little species, in the U.S. was being bred by one guy in Northern California, George Seidel. He had a knack for it, and he would mass produce them annually, ship them off to Europe, sell them in the U.S., bam, 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 bam. And people in the U.S. sort of relied on George, and very few were ever bred except from George. I remember when I bought some and struggled to breed any, I called him up, because he said he fostered everything under ringnecks. And I can remember the conversation so clearly. I said, George, my ringnecks won't feed these birds at all. And he chuckled and he said, I must have gone through 1,000 ringnecks. I'm sure he was exaggerating, but that's what he said. I must have gone through 1,000 ringnecks before I found a handful that would do it. Well, I never found that handful. I managed to get them to breed by setting up an aviary with what I thought their natural habitat would look like, with dried grasses and rocks, and sure enough, they settled down and they bred. But the ultimate tragedy of this story is that when George passed away, his wife sold all those birds to one guy, who then shipped them out of the U.S., and that was the absolute end of plume doves in the U.S. Gone. None to be found at all.